My name is Thomas J. Buckholtz, or Tom Buckholtz, and the period I'd like to discuss with you is late 1989 to early 1993.
Wonderful. So tell me, and if you can, try to incorporate my question into your answer. So if I say, how significant was this, you'd say this was significant because, that kind of thing. So tell me your involvement with the TCP/IP specification.
Okay, during this period, I was serving as a commissioner in the United States General Services Administration. And among other things, I was co-CIO, co-Chief Information Officer, for the 4 million person executive branch of the government. That was 100 of the 2,000 people in my group. And then most of the other 2,000 people were a $1 billion a year business unit. And among other things, we provided telecommunications services to much of all three branches of government. And that included what we called the world's largest quote-unquote private network that connected 1.5 million phones and computers, and a bunch of information security services and other sorts of things. Now, TCP/IP comes into this for me in several ways. Number one, under the first hat that I mentioned, by the way, there were two other hats that I didn't mention, I actually signed the document every 6 months that listed the Federal Information Processing Standards. The work on the standards was done in the Department of Commerce, NIST, but the official document came out with only the signature of the GSA commissioner, the role that I had. So federal standards, my document, only my name was the only name on the document. During the period that we're talking about, we were very aware that there was a need to connect computers together and to transfer data and so forth. So it turns out we were on top of this issue, but in a way that sort of fits this discussion in a funny way. I signed a regulation that said that when the government, the executive branch of the government, bought computers that were supposed to communicate with each other, that the vendor had to certify that they were GOSSIP compliant, GOSIP, as in Government Open Systems Interconnection Protocol. So we were on top of the issue. It just turned out that we didn't quite have the solution that would be the dominant one later. And I looked before this event on the web just to see if I could find any history. And I found out that I didn't find it directly, but apparently the order that I signed, relevant to procurement, wasn't rescinded until 1995. So you can see that here we are 16, 20 years, whatever it is, after the invention of TCP/IP, and 3% of the world market hasn't caught it as the standard that's going to be available. Now, it turns out in a different direction, by the way, this happened through an assistant commissioner for my government-wide co-CIO role, through an assistant commissioner who led the telecommunications portion of the business unit. I learned a lot, and he had a lot of perspective on what was going to happen. And so during this amazing period, 24 years ago or so, he was talking about the cloud. He was talking about cloud services. He was using the term cloud. So it's amazing to see how long it took before that became something that got the recognition that it did. This discussion was way ahead of its time. So I thought that would be interesting to mention, and then maybe a few other things as to what we thought was important during the era. First of all, of course, we were trying to promote from this role that I had, 100 of my people and 6 people in the Office of Management Budget, better practices throughout the executive branch of the government. And our area of practice was called Information Resources Management, and it dealt with the use of information as well as computing and telecommunications. So we were trying to foster better information usage practices as well as the other sorts of things. And so this led to, among other things, the assistant commissioner for my 100 people in this role, coming up with the idea that a good thing to focus on would be improving governmental service to the public. So we launched, ahead of its time, in the early 90s, the nationwide grassroots movement to get this country going on improving governmental service to the public. So that was something that was ahead of its time. And that became an academic topic, a news focus, a focus for conferences from the private sector, and really spurred a lot. and indeed in another area much later probably was on the path to what is now known as service science, the study of service as a science. Over in another area, I served on an advisory board in the Defense Department called the Military Communications Electronics Board. It was headed by a vice admiral, and main members were 3-star military officers. It reported to Colin Powell, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And the vice admiral who led that had a very foresighted idea that people in the field, say in Iraq, on the ground, as we were going through at that time, or in a carrier battleship command post, such as he had had earlier in his career, should have fused data in real time that they could make decisions based on. So he had an initiative called C4I for the warrior, command, control, computing, communications, and intelligence. The I is probably the most important thing. And so he was promoting this, and this was an integration effort all the way from what people used to fusing data to fusing telecommunications sorts of things, and was way ahead of its time. Just as kind of an interesting sidelight on that one, there was some discussion about what we had learned in the first Persian Gulf War, and people said, well, we need more battery capacity. And somebody else on the panel said, hey, look, this is a 50-year-old body. More battery capacity in the field is a 50-year-old issue. And so that puts that one in some perspective. It's still around today. So those are some remembrances of that time. Do you have any questions or other things we might want?
Just tell me how we can inspire kids today and sort of bridge the internet and TCP IP from 40 years ago to where we are today. We need about a minute-long statement.
Well, I haven't thought very much about that one, but I'm very much into encouraging people to take a look at what's going on. And I would recommend when people try to do this, that you try to do it from at least 2 different perspectives. There's a proclivity, especially here in Silicon Valley, to work from the technology outward. And so take advantage of that strength. But more importantly, I would say, look from the broader perspective inward, the social benefit perspective, how people work together perspective, from the perspective of some things I heard from Vint Cerf at Google a few months ago when I attended something there. Basically, TCP IP is not the end of all protocols. There are things it won't do very well. So I would look at things like that. And I would try to actually go from the societal benefit and reuse down through a hierarchy of what outcomes do we want, what actions do people need to take, what plans do people need to set that may promote those actions, what scenarios were candidates for those plans, what assumptions are people making, and then back into the people aspects, the teamwork, the motivation, and finally into the technologies. And that's where TCP IP fits, is somewhere actually toward the bottom of the technologies. And I think people can do very well with that kind of perspective.